Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to explain to you how to write your background research. Now, the background research is the step of the project where you demonstrate a detailed knowledge and understanding of the topic that you're studying. And we can see that at the title of the actual student guidelines. So the first thing you might choose to do is actually open up the student guidelines document, and you should find that in step 1. And page 10 of 41 is where you will find the material that I am showing you on the screen. Now you'll notice it's worth 8 marks out of the 60. So almost a sixth of your marks are coming from this particular step. What else do you need to know about this? Well, the key thing that the marker is going to be looking for is that you have done wider reading and linked it in to your project. Okay, and wider reading means you've gone on the internet primarily and found out lots of different key information. Okay, now a good background research should contain some of, if not all, of the following points. But before we look at the actual points, let's just have a little look at the marker's guidelines that the examiner will look when they read your background research. So they're not necessarily looking to the background research to see this, because they'll actually spot this first of all in your introduction, but then it will be fully developed in your background research. So for 7 or 8 marks, you have given clear and explicit evidence that you have done relevant wider reading. And relevant wider reading means that you've looked online, you found lots of interesting sources of information that deal with your topic area. Okay, and the reason it's relevant is you've then linked it into your research question. Okay, so that's what it means to be clear and explicit. You've used evidence to support your findings and research. Now, that is not something that you will do when you're writing your background research, but later on when you write up your findings, you will refer back to this evidence and compare what you discovered to the evidence that you wrote about in your background research. So if you don't put it in there in the first place in your background research, then there is no way you can refer back to it later on when you write your findings. Okay, so that's also what you need to be doing later on, and you have to bear that in mind as you write your project, and once you've got your data that you start to write up your findings, that you're making those links. I'll talk more about this in a second. Final step is that you use the evidence to consider your arguments. So if we think back to the Amity burn, for example, we were comparing the downstream river changes to Bradshaw's model, and we had hypothesized at the start of that project when we were doing the hire that, for example, discharge would increase significantly. And the reason we hypothesized that was because Bradshaw's model demonstrated that. What we would then be doing is arguing in the case of Bradshaw's model and the river study, that our evidence from our river supported the model that he'd come up with in regards to discharge, that yes, there had been an increase. And we'd have actually gone a little bit further to say that, you know, the evidence we found from the Amity burn was showed a dramatic increase in discharge, which also supported his hypothesis. But we'd probably have done a little bit more argument and analysis of our river data, saying that whilst our overall findings that the river's discharge did increase from a very small trickle at site 1 to a large amount of water at the final site, that actually the changes in discharge were quite inconsistent and they didn't always increase, and therefore we wouldn't be supporting that his model and his research fully based on the river we studied. So that's what that final point means, and I've just put it in the context of a study that you are already familiar with. Okay, so 7 and 8 marks is the gold standard. You can have a look to see what you need to do to get the lower marks, but that's obviously what we're aiming to do. So what does that really translate into? So that's where these 4 bullet points come in. Okay, and rather than kind of read through them right now, what I want to do is show you practically what it should look like. So what should your piece of work look like? So if we have a little look at a project that's been done before. So this is a project from a few years ago. And I'm just going to back up one step. I'm going to look at this student's research questions, because actually it's the research questions which frame your background research. Okay, so you have to have established clearly what your 3 research questions are focused on. And obviously these 3 research questions flow out of the aim. The overall aim then helps you narrow it down to 3 particular focuses that are all to do with the aim, and they are questions. So we can have a look at the student. They said, how does the gradient of a slope affect soil moisture? and they have explained here what they expect to find. Okay, and they have also hypothesized. Right, how does that then look in a background research? Well, in this student's case, they started by telling me that their first research question, they reminded me that their first research question was looking for the relationship between the amount of water or the soil moisture in the soil and the gradient of the slope. And they've given it a wee title. I would have actually written the heading background research and put this subtitle. I would have had research question 1, the relationship between soil moisture and gradient. So she could have probably added that and had a much clearer subtitle here. But she's restated what she's researching, and then she's gone straight into saying, in the volume of Journal of Hydrology by Dr. D.R. Wayman from the Department of Geography at Bristol University, and then they've gone and explained what this person discovered. And she has also included a diagram, which she's referring to here, diagram showing water movement down slope. So she's explaining to us what should happen to the amount of water found in the soil on different gradients. And she's not done it based on what she thinks, she's done it based on this piece of research that she has discovered. She's directly cited it. Now, what she should have added is a little citation mark right here with a little number 1 or a number 2 or number 3, depending on what order, if she's done any in the introduction. So if she's not done any introduction at all, then this would be number 1, but she's already got 4 citations. She would go for number 5. Another thing I should find, in her bibliography at the end of this, there should be reference to the Journal of Hydrology. So if we just have a little look, this is the reason you have bibliographies. It's going to take a little moment to load up. Here we are. And there is D.R. Wayman, Measurements of Downslope Flow in Soil, Journal of Hydrology, 1973. And she's called it Figure 3. So she's tied up Figure 3, the model, with the diagram she included, and she's given me the actual source, the full source. She doesn't need to put all of that when she's writing in the main body of her text, but when I look at the bibliography, I can see it. Now, this is another thing the marker's gonna look at. They can see that soil catinas was looked at, this website, this journal was looked at, this journal, that's 3, 4 soil creep, 5. So she has looked at 5 different academic sources to support her research. Okay, let's go back up to this. Now, she's very explicit. She mentions the name of the journal. She links what that research was all about. She gives me a description of it, and even then goes on and explains what the model is explaining. And it's linked to the research question, and this is really, really quite important. This is not just about soil moisture. This is about how soil moisture should change on a slope based on somebody else's research. So it's tightly linked in with her research question. And she's explicit, so she's actually making that link. Later on, when she writes up her findings, we will find that she refers back to what D.R. Wayman discovered and said, and links her own results to whether they are the same as was shown by D.R. Wayman or whether they differed. Okay, right, so that's me just kind of showing you what a background research looks like. You can see the second research question was done here. This was the effect of altitude as you go further up on soil depth and some other things. You should, when you're looking at background research, see 3 subheadings. They should be research question 1 and what the background research question 2 and what the background research is, and then research question 3. So it should be broken up into your 3 different research questions. Now I'm going to show you 3 kind of ideas about or approaches you should take. And I'm going to do it in the context of 3 possible studies. So let's say you are researching the distance along a transect, a slope. You've walked up a hillside and you're looking at the amount of water in the soil, and you're wanting to present it, and you've come across this academic source here, this journal, and this is somebody's results. And what you can see from these results is that as we move along the slope at 0 meters, and this is the slope here, by the way, we can see the elevation, and this is the actual moisture in the soil on 4 different days. So this person's method was to go to the same location on 4 different days, measure the soil moisture, and then work their way along the slope, getting soil samples. And what we can see is a very inconsistent pattern in soil moisture. That soil moisture does seem to show a general upward trend, but it's very inconsistent. So their results are showing this. Now, I would have included this graph. I've done a little bit of analysis of this graph, explaining what it shows, and then would have probably gone a little bit further, saying, so I'm now going to gather data on a slope to see if my results are inconsistent as outlined here, or whether they show an increase in soil moisture or a decrease as you move up or down the slope. So one of the key things you try to do is find some data from somebody else's work, like we can see in this graph, and compare it to your own results. So if you are doing soil moisture on a slope and seeing how it changes as you move down the slope, as is shown here with this line, then it's great to have somebody else's work. And you can see that what's great about this is it's a published Journal of Hydrology. It's got a name, you can see the authors, so it's very credible. Somebody's been researching soils, they've got some findings, you're going to refer to their findings and then compare your own results to these findings. And I can certainly think of, some of you might be doing a project that contains something similar. So there's one kind of approach, something that's really worthwhile trying to find. And if you can find a bit of a graph or a bit of data to put into one of your 3 research questions, at least one, then great. If you can find something for all 3, then that's really strong. Well, let's just have a little look at something else. So let's just say you are studying the changes in demographics, the changes in the number of elderly living in rural areas. And that's what this data shows. It's the change in the old population between 1991 and 2016. And these are all the rural areas of Scotland. And what we can see is that rural areas have increased in terms of people over the age of 65, which is the cutoff for an aging population. So the SPA, in some cases, have gone up by about 20% from 1991. So we just go to the bottom. There's 91, up to about 120. So that's a 20% increase in some areas like Western Isles, but on the extreme end, like North and West Highlands, has been an over 50% increase in the number of elderly. Okay. Now, if you found this kind of data, and you were doing a project on looking at the changes in the number of elderly people living in rural communities, it'd be great to see if your particular rural community, let's say you're studying the village of Comrie, for example, showed where was it on that kind of timeline? What's its elderly population, and how has it changed over a period of time? And you would compare your data to these national averages. So this is you finding a bit of secondary data. In this case, it comes from a really respected source. It's the Social, Economic and Geographic Sciences Group, the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen. That's the title of the source. And you would be citing this as your evidence and talking about it. And it would obviously have to be in the context of a research question. So in this case, it could be the changes in elderly population in a rural settlements, e.g. like Comrie. So here's a third possible approach. So sometimes your research question doesn't have some very specific data that you can find for maybe Scotland, or maybe you've got a nice map. So this is looking at Scottish litter, and you've got some really nice photos taken of different Scottish beaches, and you've got this lovely map that shows areas where beaches have been identified with significant localized, significant widespread, major and widespread. And if you were studying a beach, you could compare your beach to, so for example, here is St Andrews Beach. Is St Andrews Beach just significant localized issues, or is it more than that? If you were doing Tentsmuir, there's significant widespread. I'm not sure if that's Tentsmuir, to be honest. And if your beach isn't on this and you were studying litter, you would be looking to see where on this is my beach falling, the one I'm studying. What color would I give it? And how does that compare with surrounding areas? So we can see on the East Coast, we've got significant localized beach issues, but we've got some pretty significant major localized in other areas. So that's what you'd be comparing your results to. And you would talk about what's in this article. You'd maybe look at the method for how do they judge this piece of data. So that's come from the scrapbook project. So you'd have to look into that and find out where they've got that data from. But your idea would be comparing the level of litter pollution on the beach, and you'd have to find a way of quantifying it and measuring it, hopefully maybe using the same technique that they've used, and then comparing it to what this study shows. Okay. Now, background research does not need to be based on Scotland. Okay. If you can find work done by anybody anywhere in the world, you're going to want to cite it and refer to it. It doesn't have to be Scotland. It can be results from anywhere that studies have been conducted, as long as it's relevant to the research question and linked to the research question and the overall aim. Okay. But anywhere where you can insert a map, a graph, or some background research, even if it's a table or a fact or a figure, that's what you want to be putting into your background research. Explaining that in the context of the research question, so linking it to the research question that you're writing about, and making it all flow. So me, the reader, can read about the background research. I understand what prior work has already been done on this particular research question. And then when I get to your results, I can understand your results much better because I'll have already read your background research. So I'll understand what you're actually looking at and why you're looking at that particular research question, and that you've found other material. And what's quite important as you move your way through this, make sure you keep track of all the sources you use, put them into your bibliography, link them into the text by putting the little citation marks in as well. Okay, so good luck with writing your background research.